and welcome to episode 11 of Poetry Worth Hearing. This is the first episode of 2023, but as always, it's hosted by me, Kathleen McPhillamy, and with music by Alex Heen. In this episode, we have an exciting extended contribution by Jessica Mukherjee, reading from her collections Tigress and Notes from a Shipwreck. This is followed by poems from Beth Davison, who we first heard on last month's episode, and also from Stephen Paul Wren and Pat Winslow. The centrepiece of the episode features Martin Crucifix talking about poems he thinks worth reading, how he started in poetry, what poems he returns to, and who he is reading now. You can find more information about Martin and the poets he refers to, as well as the magazines and publishers he follows, together with details about all the other poets, their publications, and texts of new poems on poetryworthhearing.biz. After the interview with Martin, there is more poetry from Susanna Houston and Chris Beckett. Jessica Mukherjee is of Bengali origin, but grew up in Wales and now lives in Kent. She is one of the most interesting younger poets writing now, at least in my opinion.
Hello, my name's Jessica Mukherjee, and I'm going to read for you, and I'm going to read from two collections that I've written with Nine Arches Press. First of all, I'm going to read a few poems from Tigress, which came out in 2019 and was shortlisted for the Best Second Collection at the Ledbury Month Prize in 2021. The first poem here I'm going to read is called Becoming British. They scramble in drawers for affidavits, letters, proof of purchase, receipts, invoices, voices. Her father was a district judge, Kulna Division. Amidst more shouting, letters. We need proof of legitimacy of your marriage. Headlines. National worries of smuggling in foreign women. Whispers. Her father is a stateless person. His affidavit worthless. He fled from Bengal during the riots to Dehradun. What colour is her passport? In a suitcase, under her saris, she strokes her wedding jewels. Old blue airmail letters from her father. You will bring shame upon both our families if you don't marry. Must be somewhere. The vows, she said, under the stars, garments tied in flesh red and bone white. We need proof of legitimacy of your marriage. In Kushtia, under the pole star, circling fire and incense smoke, eternity stamped with the priest's thumb, a kick from God. All papers lost. This poem is called Creature. It can't lick its neck. Its saliva drips on my foot. Distracted, I've left it, padding my wooden floors. It hides its aching jaws, its blood-streaked fur. I creep to the shops, pretending I don't care. When I get back, it smells funny. I light a candle to mask its stink. I write to my friend, tell her I hear an owl panting in the unleavened dark. She emails me back. Pay attention. I write a list of all the people I need. Bakers, dentists, candlestick makers, doctors, poets, scholars, shadows. I start believing I can regenerate from a blade of grass. I tell her, tomorrow or Friday, I'll insecticide my floors, bleach my towels, fill my heart with oxygen. I'll put it in a bubble bath, paint its nails, blow dry its fur, cover its skin with germaline, put lipstick on its cracked lips, a collar on its neck, clean its teeth. As I grasp its mane, it bristles, bellows my name. And this poem from Tigris is called Mate Choice. You didn't ask me to marry you in words. Your arms, thick as branches, kept me to you, locking me in. I told you marriage was Darwin's joke, dismissing us, what we could become, pleased at how clever I was. We would have birthed a master race, produced strong and hairy kids. They would have saved the earth from drowning. I would have liked to save the earth from drowning. Giving in to my ancestors, we would have raced with our invisible hooves to the end of the world. I feed seas with my genes. When oceans rise, fish feed when I die. I would have liked to save the earth from drowning. A few poems now from Notes from a Shipwreck, which came out in 2022. Flotsam. I'm changed into these rocks, and I'm full of noises. A fox scream, badger scratch, and twig snap in symphony of flesh instruments, and I itch and hum until my ears sing. My voice is kelp. As I wake, he calls me Miranda, says I'm his good girl, says my mother used me like a doll, discarded, broken, and painted blue. I am unspoken, unseen, and untaken. If only I could sink a sea, rich and strange. Vases shake when I'm around, he says. He'll make me sleep, never let me cross the wine-dark oceans, and yet I know I can make creams and potions. I read his books, learn to open clouds and caves where he hides the secrets. I can turn him into frog, newt, fish, and smear his pulped and pestled pages into my carved, fermenting skin. This poem is called The Shipboard Girl, and it's inspired by a painting by Roy Lichtenstein. Take a close look at that cheap girl who can look expensive with a lipstick made in New Jersey, and the watery sun on her red lips is transformative as her skincare routine. But today it's out of the window, for she hopes the boy is Jesus, certain to save her if she goes overboard. As she's meeting that talented young man she's longed for below the deck. Oh, John, she sighs, I love that you can speak so many languages. And there's his scarf tied around her bright hair, that's the colour of the ship's railings, while a white sea turns her skin into salt. This poem is called Eating with Hands. Through the thumb comes space, through the forefinger comes air, through the midfinger comes fire, Through the ring finger comes water, and through the little finger comes earth. The knives and forks are gossiping about us as we silently put them in places out of harm's way. They notice the tiger and its too big grin, barge in, know that it'll devour everything, so they sigh, lie flat and dry and untouched by us in their sharp and shiny way, because the tiger's teeth are masters of severing. It prowls cupboards, goes through the bread bin, the fridge barely glancing, placing weight where we put the meanings of our rhymes, where we empty vast slop buckets as it pisses and catches its hair in every sharp corner with its daily duties. They clatter and clink about us, say that man can't rouse his wife or give those kids proper advice, just fights and bickers, pulls each implement out and argues about how to wash and sharpen them. They say the tiger doesn't need them. Knives and forks are cowards, unlike the teacups, fragile, held trembling between her fangs. This poem is called When God Visits Me, He's Covered in Glitter. Slippery, quiet in his mime costume, with little to tell me, pretends to cry at my sad fall downs, does the trapped in a box thing with his hands, pulls on an invisible rope, hangs his head. Sometimes Prospero, sometimes Miranda, sometimes Ariel, can't always tell. If he tries to scare or soothe as prayers are answered in cryptic clues and dance moves. Whimsical, he turns up as a woman clothed in glistening fish, a bowerbird or sharp-suited magpie, whatever the mood, tells me things in shrieks and spears a word or two my way, cut up from magazines. He did fall to earth in my dream once, dressed as a blue jay with a wide-brimmed hat, told me secrets, but I suspect he tells everyone. Says Satori is the answer, but I know that's a trick to keep me listening.
You can find out more about Jessica and the publication details of her books on poetryworthhearing.biz. And now, Beth Davison with 3 poems.
This poem is called And the Bricks. And the Bricks. There is a swimming pool complex. 3 large water slides and an outside part surrounded by last night's snow, sullied by small leaf stains and shoes where the water bubbles and rises and steams. In there, one of the glimpses of love, in the shape of a young cocky male, his eyes sea green. He has a large bed frame raised higher than usual, with plants trailing around it and 3 guitars. He believes in revolution and lets you sleep on his mattress with films and sleep smells and that high, rocking, screeching laughter. He has sex with other people in respect. You have a bicycle and the bricks, or a castle up a scraggy path, or a church, the steps and the door into it like 2 open white shorn legs and a little slatted entry point. There is a drawbridge. There are tourists. You go up there when the courage hits, or what they may call wanting, what you may call desperate. There is a guard who watches your circuits. With the same nonplussed eye, he watches the hanging boats from the ceiling. Father, you say, mother was useless. Praise be, Father. The bricks are yellowing. There is a car park next to the church, a viewpoint, a lover's bench, a place you flail about, try to dissipate the tightness down one neck side, certain repeated songs, the guard looks on. You do not care for his bed frame. How that is. How you know your own mattress with nothing around it, hollowed, weighty with coconut fibre. How tired you are as you sink end of day there, trying a glimpse of love in vanilla candle, a glimpse of love in travel-size hairdryer, a glimpse of love in one woman bronze cafetiere, a glimpse of love in a chipped mosaic floor tile, balcony, memory of red frame with small wheels, waiting, polished, silver bell, memory of cleavage on a low doorstep, a woman with the thinnest eyebrows rising, thought of 3, 4 dry-skinned bats unbuckling themselves from their own wings, and the bricks, and the bricks, and the bricks. This poem is called Lady In. Lady in waiting, shoved between bed frame and mattress, will, later, go to lover, say, take what you want, love, in translation. Oh, giddy up and the cracks in your spider trails. Or sheet on your bed the day the nurse stutters, bruises her lovely tongue with lines like train track. For now, in quarantine, she traces silhouettes from memory, such a long stretch. Cricket song, street light, time all orangey down the wall. Spread-eagled, a sword in each hand, remembers, sandstone rebuild of 17th century castle, this kind of thing not a dream. Turning darkwood staircase, twitches of an owner blew himself up in a spray of boiling glass, thick, hot, apricot. Lady in atelier space, above, below, not right here, stepping over mountain dog who on her last visit has passed away. Down through unkempt supposed maze ring lights up natural pool light, click, algae in them shimmers. Her chosen youth more youth than she ever manages. Smoothness away from her tepid shower, tootsie on the concrete block. He takes the gravel track and old Ford down to the village the next day, returns rocking, beer bottles, huge lens swinging, wheat in his chest hair. Oh, Lady In. This poem is called Please Leave. Please leave. I was not made to deal with this. My whole groin is a burning place that weighs down like a shaft of firewood or groceries. I want to dump it in front of me like the woman next to me on the bus and breathe out. Breathe into the flesh as it opens and turns on that plastic seat. I trace the line of hillside I make through the window, unlikely natural element, actual rock, and the graph we are tracing our way down. My Englishness, my toenails, my quiet child self, and I taking it turns to push one another in a rusty wheelchair. I hold my glasses to my face with one flat palm and squint at this bus I'm on, this dusty street it is clambering up and this churning. You know, I wish you'd write, once, then move to some other city and change your name. We go past a hedgerow behind the shards of clothing splayed across the pavement, all these people making their lives work, bright yellow splash flowers in the middle of that green mass. Some specific you'd want the name of. We pass the post office and an open market where the clementines are spilled and spinning towards the pavement, great wisteria climbing a battered frame, high trellises behind the neighbour's house. Please leave. I live with you already in a courtyard, with that sort of purple foliage. A couple of bats asleep in the gutter pipes. A fountain rolls and rolls.
Our next poet is Stephen Paul Wren, who is a poet-scientist, or a scientist-poet. Here he is with 2 poems.
Hello, this poem is about finding new treatments for dementia. Cut the mustard. Your senses will fall down strange, steep cliffsides. Buried recalls will slip on fawning films. Life will be washed away, marking days with weights. The waters of your brain will sink beneath into a recess, a whirlpool of shade. Where are the healing leaves on trees of life? It will take lifetimes to locate the grove. Some drug treatments will not cut the mustard. They will not quench your brain's raw, writhing state. These treatments will not have minds of their own. Before we leave this earth, we will hunt out the secret method that cuts the mustard. We will locate the map that shows the way. The treasure will be covered in thick dust. This poem is called The Cries of Kittens and was written in honour of George Orwell. The Cries of Kittens. They are heard in alleyways, tired, hoarse, and kicked in the teeth. The kittens, long forgotten, knackered, but made of stern stuff. They are given gifts, afterthoughts, spilled milk, the browbeaten aid, milk that cannot satiate as it fails to quench their cries. They are told to keep working by plural societies. Single kittens on treadmills, swindled, told to stop scrounging. They have lost faith in themselves. In candled corners, dreams start, dreams centered on growing up. They deserve to become cats.
And now it's a pleasure to welcome back Pat Winslow with 3 poems.
I've always been fascinated by the image of 3 hares chasing each other. It's a circular image, and it features in icons and all sorts of things all around the world. It's a symbol of fertility sometimes. It's a symbol of the cycle of life and death. I've also thought of it as a way of looking into the past, the present and the future. It's history which has a tendency to repeat itself. This is Witness on reading War and Peace. The hare runs through history, legs it across battlefields of ice, the buckling flows that creak and split, the black maw of water that snatched 40 soldiers in one gulp. The hare has a 360-degree range of vision, meaning it can see behind itself. Smoke from fires and field kitchens, the distant puff of a cannon before the ball whistles overhead. It can swivel each ear independently, meaning it can hear a horse cough and a Cossack curse. The hare on the translator's page knocks over her glass of good wine, soils her dreams, sets paw prints on her pillows like indentations in the snow. When the job is done, when the last page is turned, the hare lies on its side and flattens its head against the cover. Pressed close like a flower, its limbs stretch in an eternal leap. Owls also hold a fascination for me. This is As for the Owl, and it's for Helen Kidd. All this talk of little owls dreamed one down last night as I was driving home from an evening swim. Out of the woods it came, small as a brown loaf, pert and neat. It sat in the middle of the road and I slowed to look. How often owls come to me. A moon for a face in a black Cornish sky, hoolieing ghosts up lamp-posts and in trees. They arrive like thoughts, indeed are very like the process of thinking, formless until you see them, each one itself, there and gone, leaving the world a little changed. And still with history and the passage of time, the Black House. I should explain this. A Black House is a feature of the Hebridean landscape. They're the old houses, crofters' cottages that people used to live in. Usually they were just 2 rooms with a fire in the middle. The Black House. The ruin is Gothic against a nuclear sky, the sun an eye in the day's dark night. Only the gable end stands and the charred remains of a wall. Cards and tea leaves could not have foretold the future. We build hope when we lay stone on stone and put fire in a hearth. Today it's home to a keeled-over sink, rusted wheels, old floats and creels. I'm crouching, as all women do, on the leeward side of the storm, enjoying a piss till the sun breaks through. Hail bounces like teeth at my feet. When the macher turns gold, a rainbow appears and grows like a 1,000-volt idea. I wonder at the suddenness of things, how sometimes we don't see them coming, only witness the burn, brief defiance and its aftermath, the slow fade to a past that's changed forever.
Martin Crucifix will be known to many of you as an accomplished poet, translator, and critic. Here he talks about poetry he has found worth reading. I'm intrigued by the way contributors to this slot, all of whom have been knowledgeable and well informed about modern poetry and the contemporary poetry scene, have sometimes overlapped, but also been so different in the choice of poets and poetry that they treasure. So, over to Martin.
Looking back, I'm always surprised that I managed to get from where I grew up to into poetry and into literature, which has meant so much to me in my later life. I began really by writing songs in the 1970s. This was the time, some of your listeners may be old enough to remember, this was the time of prog rock and so on. So I would be actually looking at the lyrics of John Anderson of Yes. But there was a little group of us at school who would gather round and study the lyrics of Peter Hamill of Van der Graaf Generator. And he was writing kind of gothic psychodramas, which looking back are rather embarrassing, I think. But we were very interested in it at the time. And I'm sure it's around then I began to think about making sort of word patterns for myself. I didn't study literature or English beyond what was then O-level. My dad had left education as soon as he could in the 1930s. Actually, looking back, he probably found reading quite difficult. My mum continued school until 16, and she should, I'm sure, have gone on further, but had to leave to earn a living. So there were really certainly no literary books at home at all, certainly no poetry. Reading was sort of passively encouraged, but no more than that. At school, I was a scientist. The plan was I was going to be a doctor. I did manage to get to study medicine. Country boy from Wiltshire coming up to the big city, London, to study at Guy's, and the unhappiness and frankly loneliness that created produced yet more derivative songs and a few poems. I can remember vividly wandering around the secondhand bookshops in Charing Cross Road at that time, and I actually stole the Everyman edition of Selected Wordsworth. But looking back, clearly poetry was sort of on the horizon, but it wasn't something I felt was mine. I left medicine and took a year out, during which I studied English A-level, and eventually went to Lancaster University to study philosophy, eventually studying English and so on. There, I really began to take the writing a bit more seriously. It was T.S. Eliot who was important to me then, I think, and looking back, I wrote some half-decent parodies of J. Alfred Prufrock, I think. And like everybody else, I think the twin poles of Ted Hughes and Philip Larkin were important. This was the sort of late 70s, really. From there, I went on to Oxford to research Percy Bysshe Shelley. It definitely wasn't the poetry of Shelley that I was interested in. It was the politics, I think. I ended up writing a great deal about the kind of philosophical background, the language, theories of language. At Oxford, there were a couple of workshops I would go to at that point. And one of them was as we called it, the Town Workshop. And that was run by Tom Rawling. And I thought I'd like to read one of his poems first. Tom grew up in Cumbria, in Ennerdale, and he wrote a great deal about that. He was a teacher, but not until he stopped teaching did he return to poetry. And he had a pamphlet published by Neil Astley, which is interesting. This is before Blood Axe. Neil Astley produced a series, I think called the Old Fire Station series of pamphlets, and Tom's was one of them. And I think this was the title poem of that pamphlet. It's called A Sort of Killing. And Tom is looking back here to his own childhood and the idea of escaping. I obviously related to that to some degree. Tom went on to have one book with OUP, and then to his horror, I think they dropped him. He had one more book with Taxus. He was a very, very good poet, but now almost sadly completely forgotten. A Sort of Killing. There had to be a killing of the guards to get away from their protective custody, to find myself in another country. Though now I resurrect them, I can see their fence was chain-linked to a past that penned them too in an inbred dale between clouded crags. If we could talk now, as we should have talked then, would they plead visited sins and stronger guards, and would they claim that drowning drink and migraine were unregarded cries for help? I think I understand, but even now, there has to be a sort of killing to stay free. I can remember Poetry Review producing a special issue on the work of Peter Redgrove, and I'm pretty sure I remember seeing Peter read in the Old Fire Station, which was the Arts Centre in Oxford at that point. His 1981 book, The Apple Broadcast, struck me as extraordinarily good, and I'd like to read the opening poem of that. It's called On the Patio. I think Peter Redgrove appealed partly to my sort of quasi-scientific background, if I can claim that, having studied 1 year of medicine, but also his, following Ted Hughes in many ways, I think his love of nature and his presentation of nature as energized and full of life is wonderful, I think. This is On the Patio. A wineglass overflowing with thunder water stands out on the drumming steel table among the outcries of the downpour, feathering chairs and re-thundering on the awnings. How the pellets of water shooting miles fly into the glass of swirl and slop over the table's scales of rust, shining like chained sores. Because the rain eats everything except the glass of spinning water that is down here, but purple with rumbling depths above. And this cloud is transferring its might into a glass in which thunder and lightning come to rest. The cloud crushed into a glass. Suddenly, I dart out into the patio, snatch the bright glass up and drain it, bang it back down on the thundery steel table for a refill. In terms of people I return to as a poet, there are many, many. It struck me that there were probably 3 American writers who mean a great deal to me, at least. One of them would be Walt Whitman. And I think, ironically, I probably came across Walt Whitman's poetry through the Vaughan Williams Sea Symphony. Vaughan Williams sets a number of the Walt Whitman pieces there. And I particularly remember, I'm not sure if it's the second or third movement, but the slow movement anyway, On the Beach at Night Alone, which starts off in this fashion. On the beach at night alone, as the old mother sways her to and fro singing her husky song. As I watch the bright stars shining, I think a thought of the clef of the universes and of the future. A vast similitude interlocks all. I was swept away. I think there's a link with Redgrove probably there, the vast similitude of the world and nature and so on. Whitman, in a misunderstanding, I think, is often accused of a sort of egotistical kind of writing. I sing the song of myself, but for him, myself includes and is, I think, merely part of that vast similitude. I saw in the Don Patterson column in The Observer with Patterson named Frost as one of the poets he went back to, and I certainly don't associate myself much with Don Patterson, but Frost is somebody I can read and read. Frost was always interested in barriers. The Mending Wall is the classic poem, I think. But in Frost, these barriers are sometimes porous. You can sometimes break through them. Other times they're impenetrable. I was interested to find in one of his notebooks, he wrote, "All life is cellular." He was quite a scientist in his own way as well. "No living particle of matter, however small, has yet been found without a skin, without a wall." I don't know whether his biology studies are up to scratch there. I'm not sure about that, but you can see the point he's making. These walls for Frost were really, I think, for him to do with identity, a preservation of identity, and on occasions, the risk of, as it were, that cellular membrane leaking or breaking down, and personality and identity leaking out into the vast world that Whitman imagines. I think for Frost, the vast world can be a rather more frightening place, though. This poem is absolutely one of my favorites. It's called The Most of It. And again, a natural scene. He is alone in the natural world. And I think the narrator, one should always be careful with Frost. It is seldom Frost speaking. It's always a narrator. The narrator is looking for a response from the outside world. And the response that he does eventually get at the end of the poem is ambiguous, to say the least. The Most of It by Robert Frost. He thought he kept the universe alone. For all the voice in answer he could wake was but the mocking echo of his own from some tree-hidden cliff across the lake. Some morning, from the boulder-broken beach, he would cry out on life that what it wants is not its own love, back in copy speech, but counter-love, original response. And nothing ever came of what he cried, unless it was the embodiment that crashed in the cliff's talus on the other side, and then in the far distant water splashed, but after a time allowed for it to swim, instead of proving human when it neared, and someone else additional to him, as a great buck it powerfully appeared, pushing the crumpled water up ahead, and landed, pouring like a waterfall, and stumbled through the rocks with horny tread, and forced the underbrush. And that was all. I love the delicacy of the way the buck, some sort of creature, a moose or something, perhaps it is. He's not clear, of course. Is allowed to be ambiguous, and it feels alien, the horny tread and pouring like a waterfall, the vastness of it. But Frost doesn't push it any further. That was all. The other American poet I do go back to, kind of for lessons, is W.S. Merwin. And in the 1970s, Merwin abandoned punctuation. Merwin does manage to leave it out. And I remember for a couple of years, I'd been experimenting with something like that. And then discovering Merwin's work was a revelation. Punctuation, I think, amplifies the way language cuts up the world, divides the world. We, of course, need language to do that, to handle it and to understand it to some degree. But I think the truth really is more to do with Whitman's vast similitude, the kind of oneness that lies behind all things. So here is Merwin, a lovely little poem, The Old Trees on the Hill. It's from his absolutely brilliant book, I think the one to get, The Shadow of Sirius, published by Bloodaxe. Again, nature is beautifully observed here, but I think the real excitement is the way, as I say, without punctuation, he narrates a situation which simultaneously combines 4 moments: the utterance of the poem, an earlier conversation with a friend, the long ago planting of this particular bunch of trees that they're looking at, and the burial of the man who planted those trees. So a vast range of time is contained within this. The Old Trees on the Hill by W.S. Merwin. When you were living, and it was later than we knew, there was an old orchard far up on the hill behind the house. Dark apple trees wrapped in moss, standing deep in thorn bushes and wild grape, cobwebs breathing between the branches, memory lingering in silence. The spring earth, fragrant with other seasons, crows conferred in those boughs and sailed on. Chickadees talked of the place as their own. There were still kinglets and bluebirds, and the nuthatch following the folded bark, the chirr of one wren, a dark shooting star, with all that each of them knew then. But whoever had planted those trees, straightening now and again over the spade to stand looking out across the curled, gleaming valley to the far grey ridges, one autumn after the leaves had fallen, while the morning frost still slept in the hollows, had been buried somewhere far from there, and those who had known him and his family were completely forgotten, you told me. And you said you had never been up there, though it was a place where you loved to watch the daylight changing. And we looked up and watched the daylight there. Those are all old white guys, aren't they? What do I read of more contemporary work? There are 3 I would like to mention. Marvin Thompson is a really interesting poet. He's published just one collection called Road Trip with Peepal Tree Press. Marvin actually grew up not far from here in Tottenham, but he now lives in rural Wales. He's an incredibly skilled writer. He reminds me of Tony Harrison in this particular way, in which Harrison always said he was so kind of flamboyant and show-offy about the way he could manage the sonnet or rhyme schemes and so on. And that was because of the background he came from, very working class, which, of course, nobody expected a working class boy to be able to write with such skill. Marvin has not said anything like that as far as I know, but that's what this reminds me of. He writes beautifully, honestly, autobiographically, but he's also very good at inventing fictional scenarios, rather strange and wild ones. This poem is from his book, and here he is, the hassled, I can relate to this, a few years ago at least, the hassled father driving his 2 kids to the cinema. A crow rises into the morning mizzle as mist clings to the valley. Tired, I bark at my 5-year-old Derris to focus on her seatbelt. She cries. I wipe mucus from her top lip and tell her there's licorice in my rucksack. She kicks my bag. Hayden, age 6, shouts, "This music's angry." On alto sax, Joe Harriot's abstract jazz swirls around us. "Sad and crazy," snaps Derris. We fall into silence. As I drive, a smile curls. My mixed-race children are listening to something I want them to love. Art that sings Africa's diaspora and raises skin to radiance. But they haven't asked to learn a history of defiance or the blues' dark beauty. Is this upbringing or brainwashing? And the poem goes on a few more lines there, but that kind of questioning of his position in English society, his own upbringing, the upbringing of his children. He's a very interesting writer indeed. I first came across Nancy Campbell. Her first poetry book was published by Enith Arman, my publisher at the time, now sadly gone. But Nancy's first book was Disco Bay, and that was, you might call it a conventional poetry book. Since then, she's published probably more prose than poetry. I'd certainly recommend her 50 Words for Snow, which does exactly what it says on the tin, taking 50 words from different languages for snow and writing, I guess they're little essays really, but some of them are so tiny and beautifully formed, they're little prose poems. Nancy, again, can write powerfully personal poetry about her own experience and her own relationships and so on. But she has got this fabulous curiosity about the world. She's endlessly searching out things, as with the 50 Words for Snow, and managing to bring it into the kind of magic circle of poetry, I think. I'm always impressed by people who can do that. Whitman, the most well-known example of that, I suppose. Everything is poetry to Whitman. This is Uneasy Pieces by Nancy Campbell, which has just come out from Guillemot Press, who are based in Cornwall. This is a tiny little, what do we call it? I think with Nancy's work, you never know what to call it. I think this is a prose poem, really. It's called Live from Munich, 1988. I've watched Miles Davis cover that famous song time after time on YouTube. I know the performance by heart, the instruments tuning up, the applause, how he shuffles on stage in patchwork jacket and shades, and while a guitar picks up the theme and the first clear trumpet note, the trill that follows becoming a benign flutter, a muttered instruction to the percussionist caught on mic, hunched now, worrying at his mute. The warm-up never seems to end, and so the moment when he pauses in the middle of reaches down for as he takes a sip of water, wets his lips. This eclipse is now the tune. I think the ending of that is a sort of unsettling surprise. There is a trumpet-shaped hole in the middle of that at the end, where what is being described is never really settled upon. The Brighton-based poet John McCullough is very interesting. He's published, I think, 3 books, and the poem I'll read here is from the most recent, from the book called Panic Response, published by Penned in the Margins. He is a very good writer, I think. And I've chosen this one because it's called Letter to Lee Harwood. And Lee Harwood, of course, another Brighton poet, but associated with the New York School. Frank O'Hara, John Ashbery has praised Lee Harwood's work. But Lee Harwood, if people are not aware of his work, is well worth looking at. And you can see Lee Harwood's and a New York School influence probably in John McCulloch. And I'll just read the opening few lines. So this is Letter to Lee Harwood by John McCulloch. Dear Lee, forgive me. I need your gentleness. The world stinks of panic, trapped heat, taller seas, bleached coral, its skeletons exposed. A virus keeps half my friends off the streets. They ghost beside shut windows. Loneliness is a turbulent factory. It makes things no one wants. My elderly neighbor says his tap water's dodgy, really cloudy now, a sort of chloride taste. He's petrified of envelopes, touching paper, then his lips, both hands chapped from scrubbing. The golems in charge could not name our dead nurses or bus drivers, but they are very proud of the government response, and we should all try our best to move on. Those are the words for their new national anthem, but England keeps smoking its people, dropping bodies on concrete, stamping the rubber heel of its boot. Again, what I love there is the way that McCulloch is bringing in so many different things. A conversation with a neighbor, obviously the pandemic is in the background there, environmental concerns, and a disgruntlement, shall we say, with the government response.
If you go to poetryworthhearing.biz, you will find the references to all the poets Martin has spoken about. You will also find some details about magazines and presses he follows to keep up with new publications. Interestingly, like Jenny Lewis, he subscribes to different magazines every year. One way of keeping abreast with what's going on and keeping the costs down. And some more new poems to end with. First, Susanna Houston.
Planted family. Ivy eyes, determined green weaver, winds around my two trunks, no longer a joyful crawler, finding herself occasionally plummeting to ankles as she takes her first steps. 6 years on, helping Mummy choose her frames, she raises her hand when the sales clerk says, "Ivy would be stunning, matches your daughter's eyes." Sister Holly. My sister Holly is posh. When no one is looking, she bullies me. I try to cover for her, to be her vine of redemption, but she turns bright red and draws blood in her defense. Aunt Hazel. She's a bit of a nutter, Grandfather used to say. Gran considered her wise. Uncle Hawthorne mocked her because she lacks any real beauty, not worth the prize. But he never gave up believing she could change. Duty calls. Risen in flames of firelight, she, white as snow, lunges toward smokeless skies, signets flapping like bellows as rear guards touch down, fairies on cake, one by one behind their pen.
Finally, 4 poems from Chris Beckett.
Fall. Until you cannot walk, you cannot really love walking. Until the muscle tears and the tendon snaps like a twig. When stars implode in your night sky and the only running thing in your body is a mad desire to run. You cannot see how movement creeps up and comforts you, how it whispers through every vein the beautiful life of the going. Every leaving, It is tea time when I leave, rolling the car without its engine down the hill, to smell every leaf baking in the sun through the open window, hear each hot pebble crunch under my tyres. Just 2 days, I tell myself, but do not quite believe it. How can you trust in the return when you are leaving? When your parents wave from the viewing deck, then walk away, or your lover is baking a fish you will not eat tonight. Every leaving is forever. A dachshund on the grass. A dachshund on the grass is not much bigger than a crow. Is this a trick of light? The sky has no light in it today, as if someone has left the room. The only colour is a streak of red from a jogger's top. I'm sitting with my cappuccino and some thoughts. It's harder to be depressed than you think. A common on your doorstep, even a small dog triumphs beside the black crow. "Grey clouds," he barks, "throw me a ball." 3 young women run their baby carriages past winter trees. Everything on the common is fighting in its quiet way against death, but also accepting it. I think it is true to say that in some lights a dachshund is truly magnificent. Purple irises. They have sprung out of their long-fingered leaves, with mouths agape, surprised to be as white and purple as a Chinese emperor, when it is still only 10 in the morning, and the night which has just left this corner of the wood was so bitterly cold that some of them, like me, thought our time had come. Our time for what? Asks one particularly querulous iris on the left. Well, to die, I say, finding that I'm only a bit surprised to be conversing with a flower. "What's that?" the iris says. "What's die?" Just as a beam of sunlight picks it out through the scrub oaks, speaking of warmth, delight, and the iris slowly trembles its petals and forgets.
Well, that's all for this episode. I hope you enjoyed listening. Please share it with your friends and send submissions or comments to poetryworthhearing@gmail.com. That's poetryworthhearing, all one word, @gmail.com. Remember, you can get information about the poets, further details about poems and books mentioned, and the texts of new poems on poetryworthhearing.biz.